There are noises coming from in front of me, but fortunately, this time, I can tell what it is. It's the sound of the friction of the chair on the floor, the careful steps of the guests filling this small, cramped room. It's surprising how many people actually showed up, especially for a story that, well, I thought, had been long forgotten. An investor said he wanted to pay me to tell the tale of my survival. He said people would love to hear a story like that. And while I hated the tone he used to describe people's excitement about my misfortune, I was pretty short of money. He said that if I got on stage with him, I wouldn't even have to answer questions, just tell my story and go. He would even go with me if I needed support. I would never have expected my story to capture so much attention. Neither would have I ever thought I'd manage to sell 75 tickets on the first night alone. The small auditorium was jam-packed, and people were lining up outside to see if someone was willing to sell their tickets. You know, he was right. The investor, he was right. People really love darkness. I toy with the papers in front of me uselessly. It's not like I need them. It's my story. I know where it starts and where it ends. Still, it's apparently more professional to have a few notes so I don't forget anything. But how could I forget? Honestly. I've been trying for 15 years, and I still can't bring myself to forget. I've tried to drown the taste with beer in the past 15 years. I tried to drown the taste with beer in the past 15 years. I tried to burn out my nose with cigarettes to forget the stench of the farmhouse. Tried to break my ears to forget the noises. All to no avail. Even if I managed to become half-deaf and drunk, I still feel everything like it happened yesterday. I will never forget. Good evening, everyone. My voice is dry, raunchy, and irritated, which is to be expected from a heavy smoker like me. I was told I couldn't really smoke in the auditorium. And it's a shame because I would have already smoked half my pack already. I've never been really good at dealing with stress. I wasn't any good before the farmhouse, but it became far worse after. I've become quite good at avoiding people and situations that involve interacting with other human beings, though. After all, I do not like the dark. Can never understand a species that leans on it so much to feel better about themselves. My eyes scan the crowd, and all I can see are various faces with interested little eyes, illuminated by the sole desire of hearing about my darkness. Their eyes are shining bright like little stars hooked on a dark sky. And again, I wonder how people could be so intrigued to hear about the atrocities I've had to endure. My hands start to shake, and I realize that I haven't said a word since I wished them good evening, a good 2 minutes ago. The tension is thick in the air, and my head is spinning. I'm not ready. I'm not okay. This isn't all right. My investor drops a hand on my shoulder and leans to the mic, asking the audience if I can smoke, as it's the fastest way to calm me down. There are a few people in the front row that gestures encouragingly, and without even looking at my savior's face, I reach into my pocket and lit up a cigarette. And it's good. The first inhale reaches into my lungs fast, and I feel the smoke roll off my tongue as I exhale. My hand stopped shaking, and I grounded myself. I'm okay. This isn't the farmhouse, and these people are not here to torture me. Or are they? And speaking frankly, listening to my story and forcing me to tell it again is a form of torture in itself. I clear my throat and start again, my gaze scanning the crowd once more. And a sigh escapes me with another exhale of smoke, and I grip the podium in front of me. My investor insisted I wear a suit for the occasion, but he could only convince me with the dress shirt, the tie, and the pants. I sweat too much to wear a vest. A side effect of drinking so much, I guess. And I'm almost too sober right now, and I wish I had my flask with me. My name is Jordan Wells. 15 years ago, I was sequestered in what is known today as the Red River Lands, of its old name, River Rock Meadow. As I say these words, I feel my tongue dry up instantly. I would ask for some water, but then again, liquids that aren't alcohol don't do too well with me anymore. 15 years ago. My voice trails as I stare at the paper. It doesn't even sound natural. It feels like I'm doing some classroom test. I stare back at my investor and look down at my papers. I can spend an hour reading those, or I could just tell my story, as I know it. And I decide to stop looking at the papers. Alright, 15 years ago. I was a 23-year-old boy with a dream. I wanted to have as many women in my bed as I could because, that's how 23-year-olds are. I joined an internet chat room called Freak Mature or Mature Freak or something like that. I'm not even sure which it was. I was on so many different websites, you see, and I wasn't the commitment type. And though I could have easily had any girl my age that I wanted, I always had a certain affection for the cougar type. A woman that had children, woman with ample curves, soft skin, and stretch marks. Real women. Well, anyway, this passion of mine brought me to connect with a rather lovely old woman named Karen. Well, I think that was her name. She was absolutely lovely, curves for days, and eyes that would make a man melt if stared at too long. I chatted with her for a few weeks, and we exchanged phone numbers and had the most amazing phone sex I'd ever had. Her voice was the most erotic thing that I ever heard. I realize that I'm going pretty graphic, so I allow what little saliva I have in my mouth and twist my tongue. While there are no children here, I do not wish to offend. But then again, these people are here to listen about my terrible past. They can probably endure a bit of nastiness. Anyway, Karen was a mother of 3, and the honorable widow of a well-decorated officer. She showed me his medals in the chat room more than once, while also saying how she felt desperately lonely. Needless to say, those were the magical words to get the cogs turning in my mind. We eventually settled for a meeting, after much convincing on my part. And she told me she had 3 younger sons that didn't live home anymore. Sons that, at the youngest, was barely a year older than me. It was evident that she felt shameful toward our age difference, but not enough to subscribe to a cougar chat room, apparently. The crowd laughs, and I wonder if my tone suggested it was a joke for a moment, but it wasn't meant to be. So, Karen invites me to her place, and I drive 2 states down, hours and hours of fields to my left, and hours of fields to my right. And I'm talking way down the ass of Mississippi, if you know what I mean. Barely a house every 10 miles or so. So much that I'm wondering if I shouldn't turn around and call someone, because I might have been tricked by a cute late 40 redhead who wanted to bang a young man. This time, I'm the one to laugh. Although, unfortunately, nobody follows suit in the auditorium. And I suppose that's what happens when you lose touch with humanity for so long. As I imagine myself back in my car, I can feel my forehead covered in sweat. I drove for God knows how long to this place and went straight to it. No stopping. No, I didn't have time to do that. I had a woman to take care of. I drank 4 coffees on my way down, and it was so damn hot around noon that I had to take my shirt off. Every few minutes, I had to shift in the driver's seat because my skin was just stuck to the leather of my seat. And I'm sure that if I had waited a minute more, I was going to fuse with that seat. My heart starts to race as I realize I'm really saying it again. Not to cops, not to a therapist, but to a crowd of willing folks wanting to hear about this gruesome story. I swallow heavily as I take another sip of water, and I silently wish it was vodka. So, imagine you're young, handsome, traveling south to get into this older woman's fantasy thing, and it's the gosh darn hottest day you've ever seen. I'm a northerner, always been, and down here in Mississippi, let me tell you, it's hotter than Satan's sweaty ballsack. At this point, I see a few offended faces in the crowd. Good. Nobody should be able to listen to what I endured without a minimum of discomfort. Get that? I finally reach that place in the middle of fuck knows where. It's actually called Willow Bend if I remember correctly. And if they didn't rename the town after the events at Red River Lands, well, anyway, it doesn't matter. I get to that place, cross the small village that's your typical southwestern village. And there are old women putting clothes on the clothesline, old men rocking back and forth in their rocking chairs, and no children. You might ask yourself, why no children? Because anybody with half a gosh darn mind is out of there as soon as they become of age. And this town is just as dead as its population, and there's nothing to do but sit and clean. I remember the stern looks I got as I drove through Willow Bend. Brows quirked at the sound of my engine, and frown deepened as they noticed my lack of clothes. I was an outsider, obviously. But even that dead-ass place wasn't my destination. It was past that. 10 minutes after the last house on the left, I finally found River Rock Meadow. My throat dries up again, and I reluctantly take another sip of water. So anyway, I get out of my car and I'm welcomed by a scrawny, ill-fed cat that instantly meows at me and rubs against my leg. And I lean down and give it a few pats on the head before scratching its chin, but I have no food to offer it, so I just, walk toward the home and ignore it. I don't have time for a cat when there's a mature feline waiting for me inside. As I walk toward the house, I noticed how decrepit the whole scenery around me is. And I mean, first, the grass obviously hadn't been mowed in years. The house looked like it left to abandon. And there was this obvious crack in the main window, which was so dirty it was hard to see anything inside. And I could barely see the swaying of the yellow curtains from where I stood. And let me tell you, I had 20/20 vision back then. I put my foot on the first step to the balcony, and it winces so loudly, I'm almost afraid my foot's gonna go through it if I put any weight on it. Still, I make my way up it. back muscles tensing each time the wood creaks underneath my weight, and I knock on the door. And no answers. So I knock again, and again before finally calling for Karen. Maybe she's not in the house. She couldn't possibly know when I would be there precisely. She might be working around the farm. Even if she doesn't mow her grass or take care of her home, it doesn't mean she doesn't have some animals around. Maybe. So, I get off the balcony and walk around the house. And there's a dog sleeping in the sun, tied to a pole with a chain. It barely opens an eye to look at me before going back to sleep with a loud groan. It's a large dog, and I think it's a mastiff, but yeah, it was something huge. And almost thought it was a bear for a moment. I notice his bowl of water is empty, and I take a mental note to tell Karen about it. As I walk through the backyard, I see a few discarded, old, blemished kid toys. The sun made the colors far less bright than their past, and those little Tonka tractors I used to play with are no longer yellow, but a strange shade of sand beige. Even the John Green imitations are no longer green. And I finally think to myself, for the first time, that I shouldn't go any further. Just get my ass back into the car and drive all the way back to my place. This place looks abandoned, and I'm finally thinking that I might get mugged and left to die in the backyard of this abandoned farmhouse. Left to the vultures to pick on my corpse on a hot sunny day, or worse, dismembered and fed bits by bits to pigs. I read that somewhere. That if you really wanted to get rid of a body, you should just feed it to the pigs. Well, I ain't no cattle food, let me tell you. As I'm about to turn around and go back the way I came from, Sandra comes out of the tool shed wearing very short jean shorts and a flannel shirt she tied under her breasts. Even the cowboy hat adds to her outfit in such a good way that I'm sure I'm facing some kind of Midwestern goddess. Well, she smiles at me, and I lose my composure. My jaw goes slack, and in my 23-year-old mind, I'm about to fuck the nicest looking woman I've ever met. And she says, "Hey," and I say, "Hey," back. I take a step forward, and the last thing I see is Karen's smile. I stop talking to the crowd for a moment. My hands are shaking. I light another cigarette and take a deep drag. When I wake up, it reeks of piss and shit, but nothing human, let me tell you. My chains are heavy, and there's a deep, throbbing pain in my head. I'm dizzy, hot, thirsty, and this place smells like cattle. I'd never gone on a farm before, but even I knew what cattle smelled like. I struggled briefly, but each time the chain rattles. A terrible jolt of pain reminds me that I've been hit rather strongly behind the head, and that I probably had a concussion. I call for Karen's name, but nobody replies. And I also realize that everything is dark around me. I can't see anything. My eyes have been blindfolded, and my heart hammers in my chest. And I think, that's it. That's how I'm going to die. And then I think that's the last thing my parents will know about me, is that I died going south to fuck a woman that was more than twice my age. I call for Karen again, and I sound a lot more desperate. And it's at this moment that they enter. 3 of them, if I recall correctly. And I guess quickly that they're Karen's sons, and they're unhappy about the idea that someone their age would be with their mother. I hear a laugh, and then I beg. I didn't want to die there, so I honest to God begged them, then and there, right before anything had happened. Told them I'd give them everything, including my precious car if they'd just let me go. And that's when I felt it. They shoved something slimy, and wet, and moving into my mouth to shut me up. And for the first time, I'm glad that my eyes are blindfolded because this living, squirming thing is pushing into the back of my throat. I feel my burger go back up before being blocked by the living creature in my mouth. I think I screamed when I felt them pull it out. Everything that was going up found its way out, and I threw up all over myself before they shoved that snake in my mouth, and I simply prayed it wasn't a venomous one. And I can only assume it's a snake from the texture and the way it slithered in there. And I taste blood, and I wonder if I've been bitten. I feel no pain, only intense discomfort at having my throat tampered with by a reptile. They take my blindfold off at the same time they pull the snake out of my mouth, and I realized in horror that it wasn't a snake they had shoved in my mouth. It was a lizard with its legs cut off, and the blood I was tasting was that of the wounded animal. I retch again, and much to my dismay, I realized my stomach wasn't empty from the first time. I go into shock, and that's only the first day. On the second day, they brought me brown liquid in the dog's bowl and told me to drink it. When I asked what it was, they told me it was water, just not purified. And you cannot believe what a thirsty man would be willing to drink. But before that, I cried and begged again. Asked them why they were doing this. Two of them laughed, and another one leaned towards my ear, brought the bowl close to my lips, and gently tipped it. And he told me, "Come on, boy, you can do it." And I cried as I swallowed it. It took a while till I realized that they were making me drink insects. They mixed them with the water and shoved them in a blender. And that mixture was what I had to drink. And I know it because when I stopped drinking, the same guy pulled the daddy longleg's leg from the corner of my lips and looked back at his brother with a smile before saying, "Seems like this one wasn't blended well enough." I vomited again, and I felt my strength leave me. I hadn't drank anything since the 4 coffees the day before, and I was starting to feel like I was really going to die, locked in an abandoned barn after being fed animal corpses and bugs. The third turned towards me and added, "See, that wasn't hard. You're doing great." I started to cry again, and I heard them laugh, all except the third one who made me drink. He didn't like tears, so he tried to stop them with kicks to my face, my chin, my stomach, and my legs. By the time he was done, my muscles were all cramped, and my wrist was dislocated. One of them suggested they put back the blindfold, as the sight of my tears and sunken eyes were throwing them off. The blindfold was back on, and darkness was my only friend. It's a sad thing when you're grateful for being blind because you know you won't have to see what they do next. And on the third day, they peeled a bit of my skin off my chest and salted the wound. And the scar is still there. On the 4th day, I was fed a meal and given some water, for my survival, I suppose. and I guess they liked my reactions. Pain, sadness, anguish, torment, and I showed them everything. Of what they had fed me, I did not know, but it was edible, soft, and tasted like nothing I'd ever had. And it wasn't until years later that I discovered what I was fed. Unfortunately, it was the meat of the previous guy they had there. On the 5th day, they beat me again and nearly drowned me in chicken. It was warm and thick, and they held my head in the blood and organs bucket until I made bubbles. And after that, I went back into shock. I remember glimpses of my attackers as they played darts with me, using my chest as a target. The closest to the heart wins. My chest was so full of holes, and they poured vinegar and vodka on it, saying they were trying to cure me. Get it? Cure me. And on apparently what was the 9th day, I was rescued. Someone in the village saw that my car was still parked out front and remembered that a shirtless kid passed in that car. I heard gunshots, fights, and screams, but I was blindfolded, so I wasn't given the pleasure of seeing my attackers die as the police got to them. I look away from the crowd. I'm white as paper and my hands are shaking. Didn't I have a cigarette lit? Must burned on its own. I drank some water. After that, it's all that you know. The police, the corpses, the guy they never found. Karen was the bait for her 3 psychotic sons. They worked together so they'd have people to kill, and I was the lucky one. The word lucky tastes acrid in the back of my throat. Tastes like lizard blood. I need 5 minutes. I want to leave the stage now. I'll come back for questions in 15 minutes, but for now, I just need to go splash some water on my face. When I turn around, I realize my investor isn't there. I make my way to the bathroom and splash some water on my face before looking at how old I got in the mirror. And I too look decrepit. A little like that abandoned farmhouse. I really let myself go. Behind me, one of the doors open, and my investor looks at me with a pleased smile. He asks how I'm feeling, and I look between him and the pale reflection of the man I am in the mirror. I do not look too good. He gives me a pat on the shoulder. You see, that wasn't so hard. You're doing great.